Thank you very much, Luis, for your presentation. And I think we have now heard quite a number of very different aspects of bioeconomy. We have a bit less than half an hour before we have to conclude. So I suggest that we make a very short round in the panel of points, and then we open the discussion for everybody. So we have 20 minutes for the general discussion. Maybe if I could start to ask, Ian, you work at the global level, and and you also showed the enormous challenges that we are facing as a global society. Why is this problem not so much discussed in our society, in politics? The challenges in agriculture in comparison to energy, for example, or cybersecurity, AI. This is all very popular in the media, but agriculture is not very present. Is that just a European perspective? Or?
No, so I was going to say, I think it probably depends on where you're located and what your immediate problems are. And I think agriculture per se for normal people is not an issue. Food is on the shelves, etc. So it's not a pain point. So it's not very newsworthy, is it? I think there are enormous opportunities around agriculture. I think you stated the challenges extremely well, and I think it was good that you emphasized that any land that we set aside has to be embedded in local economy and has to be managed. And I think this is very important on the restoration journey. AI is exciting, isn't it? AI, so of course it's media worthy. AI, I think, has a lot of potential in supporting even isolated smallholder farms. And I think this digitalization that we see in farming communities frequently is underestimated in terms of how this increases yield and how this increases benefits. So I think that part is very important. Maybe where I play the most is the next part. If you're losing up to 30% of food post-agriculture, post-harvest, then this is almost criminal, given the resources put into to create it. So there, in terms of storage systems, in terms of improving logistics, there's an enormous amount of work to do. And then if we look simply at our customer base, our customers generate 1.3 billion tons per year of byproducts. Think about that. It's just sheer quantity. Now, unfortunately, they don't generate them all in the same place. Otherwise, we would have an aggregation that would allow us to make sustainable aviation fuel for decades to come. But how do you ensure that every kilo that leaves the field creates value? This becomes a preoccupation. And this is, I think, was very similar to your model of saying, well, okay, you have to serve multiple industries, and that's very difficult for a small company, and so you have to drive that aggregation as early as possible and push it. So I think there's a whole food system problem that is not discussed, not simply the agricultural part, and of course the agricultural part is critical to all of this. And for many big industries, I mean, if you look at the big CPGs, the big anchor pulling them down in terms of carbon footprint is their sourcing. And that you would think would push more focus onto agriculture. But here I don't see it enough.
This morning, I think in the introduction of Markus Schäfer, he showed a slide with some of his projects, I think, and there was a lot of wood in these projects, and you are also looking at renewable resources for buildings. What's the potential for construction, maybe here in middle of Europe, but then also at the global level for using such resources?
Well, it depends on three factors, I would say. The first is acceptance. So what people know about materials and their properties is the one side of them, and the other is what they know and what is trusted for them and trustworthy. And so, for example, straw is a material that is used for more than 140 years as a load-bearing material in some cases, single-family houses and like, not very big houses, but they exist and they are resilient. The eldest is more than 100 years old. It is still visible in France, in the south of Paris. But acceptance is questionable as a cultural issue. So will you be the first one in your settlement who builds with straw and take the lifelong loan or credit for such an experiment and so on? And the second is industry standards. It's quite a difficult issue in that, and it is a barrier against innovations. I give you an example. That is a industry standard concerning not the fire resistance, but the question what contains the dust after a fire accident. And you have to, as a producer, you have to prove that for many years, I think it's around 5 years, the contents has to be more or less the same. That is makeable with wood growing 40 or 50 years, but less with agricultural products. Depends on the weather conditions from year to year, chlorides and different topics. So industry standards are, in parts, against innovations. And the third, the third is the taxonomy or the governance of CO2 pricing and so on. Will Europe continue with this framework, or will it move back it? And that triggers people like from construction companies who think strictly in metrics.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. Yeah. Maybe before we open, Louise, you really made a surprising statement about labor shortage. You know, the common knowledge is in African countries there is 50 or 80% of unemployment in young people.
Yeah, but that's not the same as labor shortage.
Exactly. Yes.
In agriculture.
Is there any way to make jobs in agriculture more attractive, or are the cities just too attractive from many other aspects?
Well, as I said, I mean, you have to make farming attractive, and it only becomes attractive to young people, girls and boys for that matter, if it is high tech, if it gives a certain status, and it doesn't carry any status if you're standing bare feet in a field of rice and you have to bend over 10,000 times just to read the stuff. So making reading something that you can do in a mechanized fashion is very important. So mechanization has to be really not only the big combines that we think about, but very much appropriate also for different scales. But I'm convinced that if we think about building those linkages, including, with the private sector, who are the ones both providing the inputs as well as buying what comes off farm and processing it. If we think about those linkages in their totality, most of the labor will not go into agriculture, especially not with the labor saving, but it has to come all the way down to the retail and to the consumer. So taking an approach of the whole system and building a labor policy on that, again, including the private sector and farmers, small farmers are in fact also private sector, that gives you a different perspective. And when it comes to something like wood, for example, or this straw and so on, I think we should be careful not to think about one product as a solution. I think we are going to enter a phase of hybrid solutions, where it's hybrid in terms of human labor and robotic labor, whether it's hybrid in terms of the chemicals we're using, or whether it's hybrid in terms of maybe having some synthetic materials with natural materials. And if we don't open up our minds, including our regulatory systems, to taking this broader approach, then we're going to stay stuck in very low added value per unit of labor. And nobody will want to work in those conditions.
And I think you showed this average farm size, which was 1.6 hectares. And how do you see that mechanization and the small
But farm size, I mean, the trend in the whole world is that farm sizes are increasing, not reducing. Okay. And again, you have to be very careful with some of these statistics, but farmers are going to be moving out of agriculture. This is happening massively in Europe. It has happened in the US. It will happen in Africa as well. And what is now really important, that there is a policy for consolidation. I will not name countries, but there are some very big West African economies where, in fact, it's a ruling class from the urban areas that buys up land that's left by farmers who don't want to be farming anymore. You get enormous consolidation of poor quality management and in fact, land that needs a lot of investment, which they don't want to do. So there is an equity issue here in redefining agriculture and getting a new approach to modernizing agriculture. And that can only be done as a collective, not just a national policy, but I think it's very interesting that we have agriculture policies. We know when we want in Europe, for example, to support farmers, but we're doing it the wrong way. We're doing it either on surface area or we're doing it on all kinds of things. I am in favor of subsidies for innovation, not subsidies for paying what is already happening. And we need a sort of international treaty on the future of farming, which we don't have, which is very amazing to me because we have a huge treaty on climate, but we don't have it on farming, where farming is the most important way of using the land. So all of you who want to go to the UN and plea for something, please plea for a treaty on farmland and farming.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. So I would like to open the discussion, and there's already just here.
Yeah, Antonio Hautle, Young Global Compact Switzerland and Liechtenstein. What you're saying is triggering me, and also what you were saying before, Jan, on the food waste which gets lost. And my question is, if we speak about innovation, what can we do? Where is our role to change? And Bühler is already doing a lot. But I'm really asking, what can we do with the Swiss economy to bring that forward, to reduce it? And the other one I will speak with Sandor Jumbo, because I think what you are saying, to have a treaty on farmland, maybe we exchange afterwards on that, is an important part, especially now where the whole UN system is weakened tremendously. So very practical, do you have ideas where we could really promote, support this change on a local and international level?
So for Switzerland is the ideal food pilot plant for the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I agree.
So we have a thing called the Swiss Food and Nutrition Valley, which brings together entrepreneurs, startups, corporates, cantons, in pulling together the forces that exist in the food system. If you think of the global food companies that sit here, that's very, very powerful. So, and we also have a consumer base, whisper it, but price elasticity isn't really a thing.
Yeah.
Right? So that makes it a perfect place to test and trial new systems, new foods, upcycling systems, moves to regenerative agriculture, to do all of these things using all the latest technical advances that the fantastic universities and academia here can bring us, as well as the startups, and then use the links globally to copy-paste what works or to inspire change in other places. So I think Switzerland's brilliantly. I'm leaving now to go to the board of the Swiss Food and Nutrition Valley, and this is what it's set up for. And so I think it's all about creating a collaborative space. It's not about creating a new product for one player. It's about demonstrating how you can orchestrate a system with intent, deliberately, to create the desired outcome. And Switzerland is perfect for running the experiments to understand what those outcomes are. And that's what I would do. Now, if you look in terms of technology, obviously the use of satellite, I mean, we have the ex-science head of NASA building up capabilities here. That's pretty good. You know, you've got all the work that was spun out of the Crowther Lab over the last couple of years on how to analyze land use and nature. You've got an incredible history and tradition in terms of biotechnology, which can now be, say, refocused a little bit into the food system. Now we have to drastically drop the price that's used on the farmer level. But I think the technology is there, the innovation is coming. that we can repurpose biotechnology for proteins, critical food ingredients, critical micronutrients. So I think that's coming as well. And Switzerland's perfectly designed to do this. And if you look at upcycling of side streams, the problem of any upcycling of a side stream is you have one side stream and somebody creates a technology and they have to serve 6 different business sectors. And they have no knowledge or skills or contacts in how to do that. When we create an ecosystem around a new technology, we can ensure that the connectivity to each of those market sectors is set out, and that we can scale that technology adequately so that we get it to be cost effective. And then it becomes an exportable.
I'm actually
product.
quite surprised that Switzerland doesn't have a better blockchain system when it comes for the outcome of agricultural product. Because the key issue is not just what you described, but it's also to have the flexibility, depending on market conditions, to say, okay, this side stream needs to go there, then that one goes in another direction. And you need a system which you can do nowadays, because big data, blockchain, etc., it all works. But you need to set it up. And the setting up is something that costs money that you cannot ask a single private company to do. So that's where government money should go into setting up the system, then giving it and say, okay, you guys now run it and do it. So there is an enormously important momentum really also where governments can make a difference in order to set up a system that then can be self-perpetuating.
Absolutely. Yep.
The local corporation. Seriously, I think there could be a potential.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a call to action from both of you for Switzerland.
And there are a number of initiatives in that space, but they're always localized, or they're always between a few parties. It becomes difficult then to make it a standard that everybody trusts. And you're right, that would need to be a governmental move. Yeah.
Do you have the microphone? Okay. Here's a question down there.
Yes, hi. Extremely fascinating, all 3 presentations, and I've worked in this space quite a long time, so it was great to hear. I actually wanted to focus on the Bühler model of working with Mass Challenge, which I've also, I'm quite familiar with them. So my question is that the 80,000 jobs created through running the Mass Challenge programs with the startups that you talked about, is that a model of corporate innovation where you are the uptaker of the innovation that comes out of that? Or is it something like corporate social responsibility where you're fostering innovation?
Brutally honest.
Okay, let me just,
It's
a 2-pronged question.
Yep.
So if it is the former, well, actually, in either case, my question is, how are the incentives aligned to create more innovation outside of Bühler's interests? In other words, if it's corporate innovation, then you're the uptaker, right? So I get, because I've been working a lot on how to promote innovation ecosystems on the continent. And one of the things is taking capital into the continent rather than extracting the innovation to funding that's outside. How do you, could you, for example, invest in funds that are already locally based and accelerator programs locally based? So just a little bit of a clarification.
Okay. So Mass Challenge, first and foremost, is not Bühler, that's Ian. So I started it with a few friends. It's an NGO. It does not profit from startups. We built it ourselves. Bühler were kind enough to co-finance it, along with Nestle, Barry Callebaut, Givaudan, Mars, Dreyfus, a lot of other companies. And that is really something we do as an industry, as a platform to try and support companies. We take no equity from the startups. So there is no financial model embedded in it, except if the big partners don't get value, they don't have to pay us anymore, and we have to disappear. So that's the model. Because we take no equity, we get VCs around the world sending their startups in for training and development and connection. And the worst case is they go back slightly wiser, better connected, and hopefully with a higher chance of success. So we're completely non-competitive in that way. As CTO of Bühler, my R&D organization is paid to bring solutions. It's not paid to invent things. They are paid to solve problems. I made it very, very clear to them, the speed of solving the problem is the important thing. So if you can source that technology outside and you can bring it in and we can find a fair way of rewarding the technology holders for that, or we jointly participate in scaling it and we make a joint offer, I'm happy with that. The idea that a company with 3 billion turnover and 5% innovation spend can out-innovate the rest of the world is nothing short of stupid. Okay, so we incentivize on solving the problem, not on inventing the thing.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the presentations. Jonas Zeller from the Tony Peach Foundation. We were talking before about what happens if we are transitioning away from fossil fuels, and then what kind of roles has agriculture to take on. I was wondering the other way around, that right now the whole food supply chains, global supply chains, are super interwoven with cooling chains, and also with basically big shipping, like shipping, transport, and that basically the big transport ships are fueled usually by heavy oil, which is just a residual product from from crude oil refinement, where you get kerosene and benzene and diesel, and then just like the bottom, the waste product is this like heavy oil, and basically one of the only uses for it is shipping industry, and that's why shipping is also so cheap globally. That's why like global networks, everything could have so much free trade, and I'm just wondering if we are transitioning away from all of these higher value uses from crude oil, then shipping either gets more expensive or we need to like transition away from shipping. But how do you see, let's say, the global nexus of food, the global intersections, what we are talking about, of like rural Africa going to Europe? How do you see like kind of challenges there popping up if we are like transitioning away from fossil fuels in the whole transport sector?
You're asking me, yeah?
It's an open
Whoever
We're hoping you answer. Let's put it that way.
never feels competent.
We're talking
to answer.
2050. There is probably, or there is certainly a lot of innovation going on in shipping. And I think that with the pressure and the CO2 taxation, that will increase rapidly. So what do you see? You see already these modern sailing ships. I don't know whether you've seen them, not all of you, but they don't look like anything that looks like sailing, but they're quite effective as a support to still engine-driven normal stuff. Then there is enormous work on getting a better use of oil. I'm not talking about the waste, but of the oil that we're using, because it all has to do with the high calorie content. And right now we're using the worst types of oil. So I think the innovation in the shipping sector is going to change a lot of things. Secondly, if you look at the volumes of what's being transported now, and I take away all the manufacturing and all the stuff that comes our way, which is also very important, from our computers to our clothes and so on. But if I just look at food, the most important part of the transportation deals with animal feed. And that's, of course, soybean, maize, corn to a large extent. And those are the large shippings that go all the way around the world, mainly to China. China is now, of course, increasingly sourcing from Brazil and Latin America. I don't expect China to be able to produce its own animal feed, not by 2050, but not by 2100. Although, in parentheses, the interesting thing about China, and Russia for that matter, is that with the increasing temperatures, the area where you can actually grow things like maize will move up about 100 kilometers northward. So the arable land in China is actually increasing as a result of climate change and not decreasing, although there are some problems, of course, with water supply. So I think China will do more on animal feed. I think also the animal feed conversion ratios will get better as part of innovation and research and even animal genetics. So the volume will probably go down even if we have another 2 billion people to feed, because more of it will be sourced within region. It's really not necessary for Europe to import that much from the US in terms of animal feed. Well, you have the other carbohydrates, so it's rice and wheat. They're extremely important to Africa. And India, as you know, is the biggest rice exporter. That's still all going in a rather nasty way from an environmental point of view. I think the rice production in Africa has enormous potential. because you have the whole inner delta of the Niger, for example. You have more land area available in Africa than in any other continent, and especially you have more surface water. You have all the big lakes, you have the Congo River, you have a couple of other big rivers, the Nile including. So there will be more production in Africa itself. So some of these transcontinental movements will definitely be reduced. So combination of changing policies, efficiencies in agriculture, but also innovation in shipping.
I have to ask the organizers about the time.
We have 2 minutes left. And we...
Okay. So I give you the last word.
Go on. Yeah.
Just a follow-up to the shrinking farm sizes. I think it's a real challenge. It's one of the main drivers of migration, which remains unnoticed. I mean, if you look at the history of Switzerland, also during in the 19th century, farm sizes actually were not increasing but shrinking. The structural change could only happen once you create employment outside agriculture. But you have three things. You have remaining a farmer, but if you have population growth, if you have 5 kids and you have 0.5 hectares, and you don't have someone of your kids who has a job and who can send remittances, and you have to split this tiny plot among your offspring, then the only option is migration. And so that part should be really, it's not a concern. You don't read about this in migration reports or anywhere, but when you look at the history of our own country, you would know. I mean, 50 million Europeans migrated overseas in the 19th century.
Yes.
That was the surplus population on the countryside who didn't get a job outside.
Absolutely, but that's not the case in Africa right now. So it's not the people that are migrating are not necessarily the ones that come from poor rural farms. They are the ones who already are a little bit footloose. They're young men in general. They don't have a future in the rural areas, but it's not because they can't have a piece of the farm. So that's I think, a big difference. And in fact, it's not the poorest of the poor who are migrating. It's the one a little bit above that who are migrating to Europe.
Europe migration to Europe.
Yeah.
Cities,
Migration, domestic migration.
Yeah.
Yeah, they go to cities. Yeah.
You to talk about different migrations. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's true. But on demography, in the longer term, as you know, world population is declining. So the 10 billion is an absolute peak in all senses of the word of absolute. And world population will be declining after that, which actually still keeps us with the labor problem, of course, but it doesn't have the pressure on land and on the division of farms as it had, for example, in the 19th century.
Okay, I think you have a migration panel and you also have a coffee break to further discuss that. So I would like to thank all three of you for your great presentations and input into this panel. And thanks for being here.